Audit Committee to order. Let's start by calling roll, I guess. I'm Chairman Rudy Garza. I'm here. We've got our member committee person, Carl Krull, coming. Our chair of the board is going to be out, Carol Scott, but we do have another official member present. David?
Yep, here.
David Loeb. David, thank you for being here. All right, first item on the agenda. We just did the quorum call. We're going to call for a moment of silence. Okay. David, can you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Please join me in the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, let's go ahead and go into and repeat or say the Del Mar College vision statement. Del Mar College empowers our communities to achieve their dreams. Okay, Del Mar College is streaming live audio and video from the official Board of Regents subcommittee meetings, this is, on the college's website in real time, with the exception of portions of the meeting considered as closed session by statute. Okay, do we have anybody here to address or give us a public comment?
Seeing none, sir.
Okay, nobody here. Okay. Next item on the agenda, pursuant to the Texas Open Meetings Act, the college is limited to responding to public comments. Okay, that's all part of provide a statement. We've already gone through all those items. Let the record show that our member, Carl Krull, just joined our meeting. Thank you, Carl.
Had an accident on Portland.
Oh, did you have some traffic up there?
Well, I was over on the other side. There was an accident in Portland.
I know the feeling. I saw something over on 37 coming back, and I thought it was going to keep me from being on time. Okay, items for discussion and possible action. Number one, discussion and possible action regarding the college's 2026 internal audit activity, including maintenance, institutional research and reporting, and Senate Bill 17. Okay, Tammy, do you want to go ahead and go into these agenda items?
Yes, thank you. Today we have Dan Graves in Afton Bowie, here from Weaver to present the status of our current audit reports that we have. I do want to note that there was a copy of the draft final report for maintenance was put in your in front of your chairs for you to review because we will be going over that. So that's the full draft report for maintenance. So I'm going to go ahead and let Dan come up and get our meeting started.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon and welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Tammy. Yes, we do have for you our update on all of our internal audit activity for the year. As you mentioned, we would like to present to you the results of our maintenance audit that is complete. And then once I do that, Afton will actually review the rest of the status of all the remaining audits that we have for this year and where we stand with those. So to dig into that, I know Tammy just said that you have your copy of the report that was placed in your chairs, but we have completed our report, internal audit over maintenance. That, as a reminder for you, the scope is focused on the design and effectiveness of the maintenance processes, really where we looked at the facilities maintenance, grounds maintenance, construction and repair processes. And if you recall back to several of the scope discussions from starting at the tail end of the last fiscal year into the new fiscal year, This is really an audit of where the intersection of maintenance, construction, repairs, and deferred maintenance all sort of join in. We wanted to look at a scope that considered all those different elements. So we're looking at the governance and strategy of the maintenance process, along with financial planning and budgeting, facilities, conditions of repairs and maintenance, data and reporting, and then also the execution of maintenance. So we wanted to take a look through our three objectives, with the first objective really being centered around the completion of the annual maintenance and deferred maintenance plan. So we have a budget for maintenance and deferred maintenance. How are we doing? Are we monitoring and managing up against that plan well, and how we executed that? And then the next objective, looking at unscheduled maintenance and how do we handle unscheduled maintenance? Do we address it in a timely manner, prioritize it, and complete it? And then the last part is an overall strategic planning element of looking at how we budget for maintenance, deferred maintenance, and how where that intersection of maintenance, deferred maintenance, and then construction all tie in, because you can address maintenance and deferred maintenance with a new construction or repair. If you decide to just do a major repair or reconstruct something, then that could take items off the maintenance and deferred maintenance list, because just inherently you're essentially scrapping something and rebuilding it new. So we wanted to take a look at all three of those elements all integrated in. Our coverage period, we looked at, since we started this in August, we looked at July 31st, 2025 back to August 1 of 2024. We have completed our procedures. We issued our report. We have 4 findings really to chat with you about today. Finding 1 really looks at documenting and having some standard processes. So what we essentially identified is there's a lot of stuff, a lot of good things going on in the maintenance department and the facilities department, but a lot of it is informal, and we don't have any real procedures that govern the activity, govern reporting, and govern how we're going to approach things. So we have a seasoned set of employees and staff there, but without succession planning and without having formalized procedures, it's all based on individual effort. And so while for the most part everything is going well over there and we have knowledgeable people who are executing maintenance on and executing all those procedures all the way from budgeting through execution, we don't have anything that institutionalizes the process, so that when new people come along, or someone has to be out for sickness, win the lottery, whatever scenario you want to paint, that we have some ongoing documentation that people can then reference as a guide to govern the process overall. So that's really finding 1. It's a documentation issue of, hey, we need to be putting some things down of, this is how we're going to operate, these are our standards, and this is how we're going to document what we do.
Are there any off-the-shelf programs or so on that can assist in that?
There are, and the college currently has some of them.
Okay.
So we do have, there's in the report, you'll see that there's a tool called SP Marketplace that is like a work order tool that is used for unscheduled maintenance, where people can submit a ticket and work that through. We've got some other recommendations for how to better utilize that tool that we'll talk about through these 4 findings.
Okay.
But yes, sir, there is a tool and the college does have it and is using it to some degree already.
And so they're using it on unscheduled maintenance, but not for scheduled maintenance?
Correct. Yeah, and that's essentially part of finding 4 is integrating that in and using for the routine maintenance or scheduled maintenance to integrate those elements into that, so that we can then use it for further planning. But we'll talk more about that here in just a minute. So, but this isn't just how we use the tool. This is documentation on how we use the tool, the standards of how we'll use the tool, and really a standard operating procedure description for the facilities and maintenance department. That's really finding 1. Finding 2 is not going to be a secret to anyone in the room. It's all about funding. Right now, budgeted allocations just don't hit what you need to complete what is in deferred maintenance. That's not a secret. That's probably, that's one of the reasons we're here and have this on the plan, is to talk about deferred maintenance. You have an established budgeting process. There are plans. There are needs that are approached and delivered. But right now, just to significantly and meaningfully reduce the backlog of facility needs, the budget's just not there for it, or hasn't been in the past. And so there are, other options. I know in prior meetings, we have talked about, or you have discussed, other options maybe to address some of the deferred maintenance. But in the report, you'll see that in fiscal year 25, only 9% of funds requested for deferred maintenance were allocated in the budget. And so when we're only getting 9% of what was requested, and what was requested wasn't even to cover all of deferred maintenance, it was to cover a portion of deferred maintenance. So there's got to be some other, funding sources or some other ways to strategically address some of the deferred maintenance. The deferred maintenance will never be zero. It probably never should be zero. Really, from an ongoing standpoint, I guess in a perfect world where budgets are infinite and you don't have any concerns, then yeah, you would never have deferred maintenance. But that's not a reality. But it's really about how are we going to use the budget or identify other funding sources to have a meaningful reduction or a long-term plan to reduce deferred maintenance to have it where it's an acceptable place that the board and the college is comfortable. So any questions on that one? And then finding three is really centers around how are we handling and managing current maintenance and deferred maintenance. Really, this is part of in that work order system. The tickets aren't being closed out, not consistently. So one for a prioritized work order, we had one of our sample of 30 that was a priority one that should have been addressed same day. It was resolved 2 days. So that there could be a number of reasons for that, right? If you have a priority one, you may have to order a part and it can't get here, so you can't ultimately resolve it on day one. That doesn't mean it wasn't addressed, it just wasn't resolved in the 1 day as intended. And then some of the other work orders we selected the sample of 30, and 6 of those just weren't closed out timely. So that gets back to part of what we have in finding one of how we're going to use our tools, how we're going to use our system, and setting standards for that. That becomes important as we get into finding 4 when we talk about having this integrated approach for a budgeting system that includes maintenance, capital projects, deferred maintenance, and really looking at the tools we have from prioritizing, conducting a risk assessment over what's deferred, what do we need to address now, integrating in information from the ticketing system about what did we complete last year, what were we unable to complete last year, so really having an accurate picture of what is on or what was an incremental increase to deferred maintenance, because we have a maintenance plan, we have so much budgeted to be able to do for maintenance, and then something pops up that's unscheduled that has to take priority, then we might not get to all of our planned maintenance. And so really integrating information and data from that tool, and then ultimately our preventative maintenance or routine schedule maintenance, it's tracked now, but it's all manual. It's on manual checklists. And so really needing to integrate that into the overall ticketing system so that we can have a full picture in a couple data systems that we can then run reports and do some analysis on to have a long-term integrated approach to planning for maintenance and have some strategic discussions around how the college will address deferred maintenance going forward. So those are the 4 findings. They're kind of beefy. We did risk rate those at moderate, though. We didn't see any impending danger to the college on those, but they are things that ought to be addressed. And so that's why they've been risk rated as medium or moderate. The college has responded to all those. They do have planned dates within the next fiscal year to address the issues, or to at least begin addressing the issues, and those responses and dates are also included in the report. So that is the results of our maintenance audit, and so I'll pause for any questions before we continue on the presentation.
So if I get that right, we pass a budget that has a maintenance budget in it. And if something unforeseen comes up, it comes out of that budget rather than reserve like our general reserve or our contingency?
Well, Tammy may be better able to answer that.
We have different parts. We have our regular maintenance operations budget, which is things that we know are going to happen during the year.
Right.
So we do have that budget.
Okay.
We also have a separate line item that is deferred maintenance, specifically for deferred maintenance. So this is the second year that we have implemented that line item.
Yeah.
So last year was the first of the second year. And then we do have some projects, I'm going to say they have been pre-approved to use plant fund. So they would come out of the surplus from previous years. So those are kind of the three pockets that I guess you could say that it is there.
I would suggest, there's going to be a certain amount of unplanned bad stuff every year. And trying to quantify that and budgeting for that separately. I know I have like a certain amount that I stick in my budget every year. Just it's the $100,000 thing that's going to happen. I don't know what it is, but one happens every year. And so I think that might be a good approach on how to handle that so it doesn't knock off the other stuff. And
I don't want to mischaracterize.
That's what I was gonna say.
I do agree that there is some of that already in the
Yes.
maintenance budget.
yeah, okay.
So you have planned maintenance in there. There is part of that budget is for unplanned maintenance.
Yes.
What we identified and looked at and how we would recommend approaching it, which is, it's not a finding because the college is doing that, is a historical look back on what have we experienced previously over the
Right.
last 5 years for unplanned maintenance. So what do we need to budget this year for it?
Okay.
But there's always, maybe the extra $100,000 thing that happens that you don't know about. So there's no real way to track that right now because our planned maintenance isn't in a ticketing system. So we don't know what we've had to defer unless we go back and look at the paper copies of all the checklists. So that's why we talked about integrating it. So I don't want to characterize it as that we're not planning for unplanned maintenance because the college is. It's just we don't have a definitive way to tell how much or if it's had impact on the planned maintenance because of the way we're tracking the
It's
activities that we're
it's
conducting.
an informal, I guess you could say, like a priority list, but
Yeah.
also some of the things that come up during the year that aren't planned actually are on the deferred maintenance list. So
Yeah,
that's
it's when-
typically is what
They
comes
just become
up. as-
critical.
Yeah, it's when, exactly, Regent Kroll, it's when things become capital in nature. It's when they go from a busted pipe out in the driveway to, oh shoot, we got to replace the entire pipe and all the plumbing going to. So it's when it goes from a $1 million problem to a $5 million problem, is where we're too reactionary. And because we don't know what we don't know. And then when they stack up, our budgets do not react that. But I'm glad you said that, Dan, because yeah, we do budget money to handle the busted pipes and the busted units of those kinds of things, small stuff, relatively speaking, $1-2 million projects. But once they transition and fester into the multi-million-dollar scenarios is where we're stuck. And we have some ideas and how we can get through all that, but for now, these formalities have to be resolved. Just a little side note, as it relates to facilities, we're in the midst of bringing in at least two candidates for the position, because currently that position is unfilled. Ms. McDonald is handling maintenance and facilities in all her free time that she has. That is a funny joke that she does not have, and so I want to thank her for all that she's doing. And that committee is moving that position forward. Just so that you know, because we need a full-time perspective on this. Mr. Strybos, our former vice president over physical facilities and maintenance, is still helping us as well. And he comes in from time to time and as needed, and helps us watch things through there as well. So we still have a little ways to go, but we're about to embark on interviews and so forth here in a couple short weeks.
Right. And side note, a lot of these things that are coming up, this is the first time that facilities or maintenance, this type of audit has happened. We have a lot of other functions in the college that have already had these audits. This looks similar. We had a lot of informal, we didn't have some succession planning, so we've all come through that learning curve, and now it's the time that maintenance needs to go through that same learning curve. But, so this is kind of, and the overall rating was a satisfactory. I know you have your report there. But, so we do need to move out of that informal environment into the formal. Have some ideas. I'll be happy to pass along what I've learned in the last 8 months when we do get somebody here in a few months. But, yeah, so there are some opportunities. There are definitely opportunities, yes.
Right. No, I mean, we asked for this because we wanted to improve,
Yeah.
not because we wanted to whine.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think this is great that we found some things that we can do better on. And I know, you know, as a board, you know, we spend a lot of time focusing on the product, you know, which is the students, but we do have to make sure that we're taking care of the facilities that product gets created in. And so, you know, it's a balancing thing. And, you know, I would say, you know, yeah, we do need to talk about if there are critical projects, and especially if there are things laying out there that cost $1 million now, but if we don't fix them now, they're going to be a $5 million problem a year or two from now. You know, we need to know about those things. And, you know, it's not you know, people in those jobs can feel uncomfortable saying, no, you know, boss, board, no, we really do need this much money to do this thing. And so I hope in this process, we give you all the capability and the feeling that is absolutely what we want. You know, we want to know when something's critical. We do have resources as an institution. Yes, it would be wonderful if we could stay within the budget, but if it means leaving a crisis for somebody else to deal with, that's not what we want to do.
Okay, thank you. I make sure that in any of the areas that we have audits, because people have a tendency to think they're auditing people, I say, no, we're auditing processes. This is not people. We're looking at processes so that we can all have the opportunity to do better. So make sure, because we do have a great group of facilities. They work really hard.
Well, in my experience too, but there's another part to this that you have the people that are within the buildings that something starts to go wrong and they decide to live with it.
Yes.
Until it does become a major problem. So I think there's another aspect of this that the people who manage the various buildings or live in these buildings ought to also be advised and urged to, you know, if you got a leaky pipe, drain pipe underneath a sink, you know, report it.
Yes.
And we do have 54, 55 buildings. I was looking some of that up. And each building has what we call a building coordinator. So everyone that houses in that building or lives in that building, they know that if they do see something like that, they're to report it to that one person or that designated person, and that person gets the work ticket put in. So we do have a system like that in place that they are to report things to that designated person in their building. Because we have about 54, 55 buildings and about 1.8 million gross square footage.
And even then, our best attempts at that, we still have the examples that you just discussed. And sometimes, and we have things that we're dealing with that have turned into big problems because they simply were not reported completely, let's just
Or
say.
they think somebody else reported it, but actually nobody reported it. So
Yeah,
so
we-
we always can do better. Yes, we can always do better on
And
that.
there is a backstop process to that, in the report you'll read, in the background section, there's a process where the facilities department conducts facility condition assessment, FCAs. And so there is a process to go through and inspect facilities to look for those unreported items and do an assessment of the facility. So there's even a backstop to that, that they have in place. So.
And to add some additional layers, we also have, we do have the contracted out custodial, we have contracted out security, but both of those groups have been informed and coached. If they see something, because they're another set of eyes and ears, they are to report it. So we do have another extra layer of when.
And that has worked.
And that has worked, because, we
Recently.
had something that happened recently, and it was actually the security guard that was making a round through a building and noticed water on the floor. And if that would not have been reported, because it was during spring break, it would have been a heck of a mess if we wouldn't have seen, someone wouldn't have seen it till we got back. So there are other things that we do, absolutely talk to these other groups that walk around campuses all the time. It's part of their jobs that we stress to them to report it.
Yeah. Over spring break, Ms. McDonald was heading to the campus with a bucket and a mop. I said, hold on, Ms. McDonald, we'll get it fixed, hang on. That's not entirely true, but the sentiment was there, and I think she would have gone if we would have asked her to, or let her.
I went there,
But-
just didn't take them off.
But those, so multiple layers, and still, like I always say, things that can go wrong will still go wrong, but despite our best efforts. But still, the purpose of this audit is one more great example of how we can move forward, get better in a more formalized process. And I think this is going to be a tipping point for some big, broad conversations to bring to the entire Board of Regents in order to advance and ultimately, and most importantly, finish out these facilities for our product, which is instruction, and to make sure that everybody's here safe and in a comfortable environment.
Just to add a little bit to, or just to ask about options, related to the example you used, a problem going from a $1 million to a $5 million problem, and same thing that David alluded to. And again, not wanting to, most people do take their budgeting process and their responsibilities seriously, not wanting to bust a budget by spending a lot of money on a particular item. I mean, do we have a way of identifying those items that are likely to enter that scenario and say, okay, it's not budgeted, but contingency is an emergency. We don't have a hurricane, we don't have a storm, but it can be a huge expense, and there could be a huge savings by fixing it at the right time. So do we have, or do you have to get an approval, or do we have the manner, the process, or the vehicle by which we can quickly identify those items when they do happen and be able to get approval and fund them through something that we've already got in place? Just
Yes.
so that,
So we have emergency declarations of emergency. We can operate under those parameters and so forth and move more quickly in concurrence with, in communication with the board, and not always with full permission from the board, if you will, or approval. It depends on the nature of the emergency. There's emergencies and then there's emergencies, you know.
sure.
And so, and usually these are, it just depends on the timing of it and those kinds of things. But it depends what dollars they're going to tap. It depends what resources we're going to have to access, the level of, it's a situational type of scenario, but there are things in place where we can move more rapidly. Dan, were you going to say something to it? Okay. So, but we have those opportunities available to us, such as when a hurricane comes. You know, we've been given, the way we've experienced both with Hannah and Harvey is when things happen, just move. People first, security, and then we have all our protocols, we have incident management teams, we have all our situational, tactical teams in place and everything else, and we just roll them out because we have to take care of things yesterday fast. We have things locked in place in terms of procurement. We have emergency supplies and services prepaid and all of these kinds of things as well. Fuel, reclamation services, all kinds of things prepaid and or preloaded for those kinds of things as well, which would be a good update one day. Ms. McDonald, you were going to say?
Well, I think for part of that conversation, it's depending on the fund, like the plant fund says the Dr. Escamilla can make those decisions if he feels like something needs to be used, and it doesn't have to come to the board, but he has to notify the board, so he doesn't have to ask permission first. But there are other funds, like to use the contingency in our budget, then that does require it come to the board for approval. So
Yeah,
it
there's
just depends
certain
on,
ones that are
like,
restricted.
which fund you want it could come from. But as what you were talking to, Samir, we have some new contracts in place too. So if we do have any type of emergency and it requires some type of remediation or restoration, we do have a lot of those emergency contracts in place now.
I used the wrong word, thank you.
Yeah.
Restoration.
Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't mind us having a policy where, at the end of the year, leftover contingency, a portion of it goes into a fund that you all can use for either future emergency repairs or for the deferred maintenance. And then kind of work in our budget to slowly up how much we're budgeting for maintenance every year. I wish we could grand slam our way out of this, but I don't think it is. It's kind of how do we incrementally get there, and then, but being able to get there by, okay, every time we save some money in the operating budget, being able to set it aside for stuff like this, I think would be helpful.
Yeah, you didn't get here overnight, you're not going to get out of it overnight.
Yeah. And I think if, we'll end up having some big items that probably need to get handled in some sort of bond. And I think running into that, if we can show them, okay, here's what the plan is, and here's how we're working through this, and here's how we're ensuring that we don't end up back in this. I think that helps on selling that and making people feel comfortable that we've, fully gotten through that issue. But yeah, how often does somebody with a clip, with a checklist that, looks at specific things go through each building?
Those assessments, the
Yeah.
facilities condition assessments? Let's see. I don't know that I have it handy. I know we have it in our notes from the audit, but I don't have that fact handy. I'm sorry. Annually, okay.
Annually? I'd look at doing that on a more frequent basis.
Yeah, second paragraph of the background, on an annual basis, the physical facilities department submits a budget, and those are based off the facility condition assessments, the college.
Is
we
it-
have a Gordian FCA tool, so.
Yeah, I think the annual basis may be a little bit of a misnomer in that it takes, by the time they get around to it, I mean, I think there's probably around the year that they're doing that, as I recall. I'd have to ask John, but let's verify, Tammy, because I think it's, this campus, this quarter, this campus, you know what I'm saying? So I think it may be not handling, you know what I'm saying?
That sounds accurate, yeah.
I think that's the only way it can
There's
be
ongoing
done.
assessment all year long, and by the time you finish, it probably takes a year cycle, and then you circle back. But it just depends. There's some things, in what areas, because some of
Yeah.
the assessments are done by EH&S, so they may
Because-
have to be every 6 months, not every year. So
Yeah,
it
there's-
just depends on what type of assessment that it is.
So it's kind of somewhere in the between what we're talking about here. It's not all at one day, one time.
Right,
Here's the
yeah.
annual, So we can clarify that, Regent Loeb, and we'll get back with you on that one. Because it's not that simple, right? And I know I'm preaching to the choir here.
Right.
But I just, for the sake of clarity, I think we need to, what we're asking for, that request should be clarified.
I would just say, and there's different levels of that, but I would say if it's somebody who's trained to really be able to recognize the early signs of a roof leak, knows what a trip hazard looks like, know what an ADA problem is, and, walking through once a month with a little clipboard with all the stuff that they need to do, and then, oh, wait, no,
I think-
something didn't get picked up by the,
And I think
kind
some of
the
that was
civilians.
outsourced at one point. So certain aspects of this was outsourced. So it's probably a more complicated response that I'm able to give today. So
Okay.
we'll get it all answered though.
And like ADA is out of EH&S, of course, if anyone sees something they feel like isn't appropriate, then they know where to report it. But also, just like trip hazards, I mean, we all, Delia identified one a couple weeks ago on a trip hazard, so we got that taken care of. So I think, like you said, back to what Regent Kroll said is, how do we report it? I think it goes into that reporting system too. If you see something, say something. So in any of these areas, but I understand to have a little more formal.
We'll get a hold of John. John and Janet will be able to help us answer that completely, because we need to know completely.
Yeah.
And I need to be better, more responsible than I am right now for that.
If there's no other discussion, then I'm going to pass it over to Afton, and she's going to cover the rest of the status for our internal audit program.
Okay, so Dan covered maintenance, which is completed. I'm going to cover one that we have in progress, as well as a couple on the horizon that we have planned to complete before the fiscal year end. So this next one is an internal audit over reporting data validation. And so really for this one, we scoped it and have begun our procedures. And so the scope, we are looking at the design and effectiveness of the college's data reporting validation process. A little bit of an extension of one we've done when we created that data reporting matrix, if y'all remember. But really this one is focused on some areas including data handling. So for data handling, looking at data lifecycle management, ensuring that we have procedures for securely transmitting data, securely disposing of data, data classification, so making sure we have consistent, accurate labeling on all of our documents and data, that data classifications are appropriate and assigned and aligned with policy and based on any privacy policies and things like that. Data access and role definitions, data quality and validation, so ensuring that there are formal procedures in place for validating data in those external reports that we are submitting, making sure that there's a process to reconcile data if it does exist in multiple systems, and then ensuring that consistent data definitions are used. So institutional data dictionary and metadata management, that activity will be looking at making sure the data dictionary is complete, metadata standards are established and then integrated with reporting tools. And then that last bullet, data workflows, documents, diagrams, that's really the documentation piece of this. So making sure that those critical processes above are documented accurately and completely, and that we have workflows in place that actually align with what we're actually doing. So that is the scope of the reporting data validation engagement. The objectives are ones that you're probably familiar with. So we have two objectives. Our first one is really over the design of the process, making sure that we have processes in place and internal controls to address the risks in those processes and that those are documented appropriately. And then our second objective is really making sure that those controls that we identify in that design objective A, that those are operating effectively and as intended. So we have completed that first objective design and have had our walkthroughs and met with Sushil and Ali and his team and got a lot of good information there. And we will be validating the results of that first objective with process owners next month. The second objective we are currently working on and plan on wrapping that up as well in April. But we're selecting some samples of some external reports and making sure the processes we learned about, and especially because there are some that are more on an individualized basis based on those reports, that we get a good understanding of those and are comfortable with how all that data is validated in those reports. The other two, I want to go back to this first slide, agenda slide, the other three, areas that I wanted to touch on that we will be completing before the end of the fiscal year. So this next bullet, this third bullet, Senate Bill 17 compliance, we plan on starting that one most next of the three of these. And so that one will be a refresh from the one that we performed last year over Senate Bill 17. So we'll be taking a fresh look, making sure that anything we identified last year is, of course, remediated. But we also are expanding our scope a little bit to include areas that we've noticed over the last year since we performed the last SB 17 compliance audit, areas that we've noticed and seen that the SAO is interested in particularly. So one of those areas, for example, is taking a little bit of a deeper look into contracts and looking for any DEI language there. And so we will be starting that one soon and plan to have that completed by the end of May. The next one that we will be doing is over grant compliance. We have started planning for this one and performed some preliminary research and planning procedures. We will be performing our field work in May here. And for this one, we are still, working out the scope, and we'll have discussions with Raul and his team on what we, want to specifically scope into that one, but we plan to look at, the grant compliance process, evaluating the design and effectiveness of those, really all the way from award acceptance and grant setup to grant closeout, reporting, and overall just monitoring and oversight of the grant process. So that one we will start soon. And then lastly on here, you'll notice follow-ups. So these are we have a couple of open findings from last year. We have one open finding in the bursars area that we had a planning call about already. That one looks like it's going to be remediated, but we are currently performing validation procedures to verify that. And then accounts payable and disbursements, there are 3 findings from prior year that we will follow up on and have a status for you on that as well. So those are our activities throughout the rest of the year and over the next couple of months. But yeah, any questions?
May I, Mr. Chair? Afton, so some of these we've gone over. Some of these are the second iterations, not just follow-ups, but second iterations on a few of these items. And Regents, what I want to do here is give us perspective on the facilities piece. And we're starting ground zero. That has been long coming. And so some things that we've done with the Weaver team has been, we've been doing for a very long time now. And then some of those things were just the urgent ones, going back to prioritization and so forth. So just to give it perspective on that facilities piece. When we were in the midst of, rolling out that $300 million in construction, over the course of 14 years, let me see, well, more or less, más o menos 12, 14 years. It was a request that we'd made to say, let us finish what we have. It was almost insurmountable. But so I just want to reflect a little bit on the history, just to kind of give you a little bit of further background as to the needs and so forth. We're fully aware, is what I want you to know, that where we are, particularly with the spectrum of things for audit that we're doing here at the college, and especially where facilities and maintenance is.
Just to frame it a little bit, when we did this at the city, it took us 2.5 years to get the list of all the property the city owned.
Yeah.
And then it took another year to get major pieces of infrastructure that were like in the names of former utility employees, because somebody had put that in the closing documents, and that's why it took, so we're well ahead of the curve here.
Well, and then also joining us here is Mr. Sushil Palamoni, our Associate Vice President over Research and Institutional Reporting and Data and so forth. So he is here. He's here very purposely, and he is anxiously awaiting to open up these opportunities for improvement in his area. He does a fine job, though. I just want everybody to just introduce him.
I've got a question related to grant compliance. Mm-hmm. And I know, because we've been touching on certain areas and we've been getting, I'm going to say, monies from different folks that are helping us accomplish our mission.
Yes, sir.
Grant compliance, do different grants have different compliance requirements? They're not all the same, right?
Entirely, yeah.
Yes. They, broadly talking about federal grants, all federal grants have certain requirements associated with procurement, some reporting, but depending on each type of grant, a grant from the National Science Foundation will have something different than one from the FDA. So, each one will have something different. There is a document that is part of the compliance documents that the General Auditor's Office from the federal government issues every year, and there's a compliance matrix. And so there are compliance requirements for each one of those, and they're outlined in the grant documents. And that's really what, as Dr. Escamilla said, this is our second time to look at grants. The first time we looked at grants, it was very much a governance
Structure.
focus on how we structured for grants, what are we doing, what policies, procedures, things do we have in place. So this is really now taking a second look. There was a lot of remediation that occurred there, and that's, I think, was 4, maybe 5 years ago when we did that. And now it's, we're coming back around to dig into say, how are we applying those? Are we really doing what we need to do? Are we identifying those specific requirements and testing against those and monitoring, managing, and meeting those requirements as a college? And so that's really what this focus of this audit's intended to be.
So as we move forward, though, in terms of grant requests, and I hear what you're saying related to government grants, but I mean, if we were, say, for instance, exploring the possibility of getting, like you said, a National Science Foundation grant, or say, for instance, some of the private benefactors like Melinda Gates Foundation or the McKinsey Scott or Ford Foundation or Rockefeller's Group, I mean, do we have a process for being able to evaluate the grant compliance requirements for those grants if we were so fortunate to get?
I could try to answer that one. We like Jan said, we have federal grants, state grants, we have some that are pass-through grants. We also have some that do come through our foundation, and they are from foundations like you mentioned, similar. But that we do have processes in place for those different types of grants, and we also look at what is that grant requirement, and then we also take a look at what is the deliverable. Are we delivering what we're supposed to based off of the grant expectations and outcomes? So we do have that in place. That was a lot of work, like Dan had mentioned, and Dr. Escamilla mentioned, that was a lot of work we did several years ago when we initially did the grant compliance or grant audit. So they do look at all pieces. They don't look at every single grant because there's so many of them, but they do take a sampling. We also, in the external audit, that group also audits some of the federal grants. So that's part of the note in the external audit report that you get on an annual basis too.
Yeah, that's the separate report on the single
It's a
audit
separate
procedures.
report, yeah.
Okay,
But
great.
the intent is, from what we did in our original grant audit, the intent was for the grant acceptance process to have that evaluation that you're talking about. And that was one of, I remember explicitly, that was one of the recommendations we had, is you need to be doing that to understand if the college can even comply with what those are before we even submit an application for the funds. And so that was part of that process, yes.
Yeah. And we do have that process. It goes through a process of different departments and different executives look at it to see what are they asking for, can we do? And I know Sue Shields is involved in a lot of grants too, because a lot of times they want data. Do we have the capacity to produce this data? So we do have those checklists in place. We all sign off, or if it asks for positions, or if it asks to institutionalize positions after 1 year, 2 years, so we all get involved. And like you said, can we deliver what they're asking us to deliver? So there is a formal process in place for that, yes, sir.
Okay, good. Any other questions? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you both.
All right, do we have something we're going to go into in the closed session?
No closed session today, Regent.
Okay, at this time, do we need to make a recommendation to go ahead and what we're going to recommend to the board, right? Okay. So I'll entertain a motion to accept the recommendations of our audit team.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, motion carries. Okay. If there's no further business at this time, I'll declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.